The air in the lawyer's office was stuffy, thick with the smell of old paper and unspoken grief. I sat beside my husband, Mark, my hand holding his. It felt like holding a cold stone. He was trying so hard to be strong, a statue carved from grief, but the tremor in his hand and the hollow look in his eyes betrayed him. Across the polished mahogany table sat Julian, Mark's older brother. He was the pillar of calm, dressed in an impeccable suit, his expression one of solemn composure. He was the reliable one, the one everyone turned to, or so it seemed. The lawyer, a man with a face as dry as his documents, cleared his throat and began to read. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the rustle of the will and his monotone voice. Each word was a hammer blow against Mark's already bruised heart. The family home, the house where Mark and Julian had grown up, the repository of every childhood memory, left to Julian. The savings accounts, the stock portfolio, the entirety of a lifetime's work, all of it to Julian. For us, for Mark and me, there was a small sum, a token. It was so small it felt less like an inheritance and more like an afterthought, a footnote in the story of his mother's life. I felt the shock jolt through Mark. He flinched as if he'd been physically struck. But then he took a deep, shuddering breath and folded in on himself. "It's okay," he mumbled, his voice cracking. Mom had her reasons. She always worried more about Julian. I guess he needs it." Julian rose and walked around the table, placing a comforting hand on his brother's shoulder. "I promise I'll take care of the house, Mark. It will always be our home." His voice was rich with sincerity, his face a mask of brotherly concern. But as his eyes met mine over Mark's bowed head, I saw it. It was there for only a fraction of a second, a flicker in the depths of his gaze before it was gone, a glint of pure, undiluted triumph. When the lawyer slid the papers across the table for us to sign, my breath caught in my throat. I stared at my late mother-in-law's signature at the bottom of the will. It was perfect. Too perfect. A cold dread, sharp and unwelcome, slithered down my spine. I remembered the last birthday card she'd written us, her handwriting, ravaged by the Parkinson's that had plagued her final years, had been a battle on the page. It was shaky, frail, each letter a testament to her struggle and her determination. This was not a struggle, this was a performance. The loops were too smooth, the lines too steady. And in that silent, stuffy office, I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that something was terribly, terribly wrong. For days, the image of that perfect, sterile signature was burned into my mind. It followed me into my dreams, a looping, elegant fraud. While Mark drifted through the house like a ghost, lost in a fog of grief, I was haunted by a single, chilling question. He spent his hours with old photo albums, retreating into the past, unwilling to speak about the will. He just wanted peace. He didn't want to rock the boat, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the boat was already sinking, and we were all going down with it. One afternoon, I found myself in my mother-in-law's room, packing away some of her belongings. The room still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume. It was a space filled with love and memories, and the injustice of it all felt sharp and suffocating. Tucked away in the back of her closet, I found a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a collection of cards she had written to us over the years. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, little notes, just to say she was thinking of us. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled them out. I spread the cards from the last few years across her bedspread. Then I took out the copy of the will. I laid it beside them. The difference wasn't just noticeable, it was a screaming confession. On one side were the shaky, earnest letters, of a woman fighting against her own body to express her love. The T's were crossed with effort, the O's were sometimes misshapen, but every stroke was undeniably hers. It was the handwriting of a mother. On the other side, on the will, was the cold, flawless script of a stranger. I waited until Mark came home that evening. I found him in the living room, staring blankly at the television. I gently placed the will and a handful of cards on the coffee table in front of him. "Mark, look," I said softly. "Just look at this. This handwriting, it's not hers." He glanced down, his eyes scanning the papers without really seeing them. A deep sigh escaped him, a sound heavy with exhaustion and irritation. "Amelia, please," he said, his voice strained. "I'm grieving. Mum made her decision. Let's just leave it alone. Don't turn this into something ugly." "This is already ugly, Mark. Can't you see?" My voice was rising and I fought to keep it steady. "This isn't her signature. It's not her." He finally looked at me, his eyes filled, with a pain so deep it was almost an accusation. "And what are you suggesting? That Julian, that my brother forged it? My mother's will?" He shook his head, standing up abruptly. I won't believe that. He's my brother, Amelia. Please, just drop it." He walked out of the room, grabbing his jacket on the way, and the front door clicked shut behind him, leaving me in a silence that was louder than any argument. I stood there for a long time, looking at the evidence scattered on the table. He doesn't see it, or he doesn't want to. It's easier to accept a painful truth from his mother than a monstrous betrayal from his brother. He looks at Julian and sees the big brother he's always loved and admired. And I understood in that painful moment that his denial wasn't aimed at me. It was a shield to protect the memory of his mother and the image of his brother. To admit I might be right would be to accept two unbearable betrayals at once. His grief was too raw for that. I couldn't be angry at him for that. But it meant I was on my own. I looked at Julian and saw a stranger sitting in our house, and I knew I had to be the one to unmask him. I had to do this alone. My investigation began in the dead of night. It was the only time the house was truly quiet, the only time I could think without the weight of Mark's sadness pressing down on me. With my husband lost in a fitful sleep, I'd slip out of bed and head to my small home office. The glow of the laptop screen became my confidant, the soft click of the keyboard my only weapon. My job as a research analyst had trained me to find patterns, to connect dots that others didn't see. Now I was applying those skills to my own family. I started with Julian's boasts. For years, at every family dinner, he talked vaguely about his successful investments and booming ventures. He painted a picture of himself as a savvy entrepreneur, a man with a golden touch. I searched for his name, for his companies, for any public record of this supposed success. I found nothing, no press releases, no business filings, no trace of the financial empire he had so carefully constructed in our minds. It was all smoke. So I changed my approach. I began digging into public records, court filings, anything that might have his name on it. And then I found it. A digital breadcrumb that led to a devastating truth. An LLC bearing his name had filed for bankruptcy 2 years prior. It was a failed tech startup he'd poured money into, a fact he had conveniently never mentioned. That single document was the key. It unlocked a flood of other discoveries. I found lawsuits from credit card companies, one after another, each demanding payment for staggering sums. The bankruptcy filing was the loose thread that unravelled everything. It was a public record. From there, I found court dockets listing lawsuits from credit card companies. I couldn't see the exact amounts, but the sheer number of plaintiffs told a story of financial desperation. The final piece wasn't a smoking gun, but a logical leap. I remembered Julian mentioning a specific online poker site years ago, bragging about a win. On a hunch, I called my friend in cybersecurity. I didn't ask her to break any laws. I simply asked, theoretically, if someone with massive debts suddenly came into money, what's the first thing a gambling addict would do? Her answer was chilling. Double down, always. That was all I needed. I didn't have his bank statements, but I had the motive, the desperation, and a clear psychological profile. It was enough. The losses were catastrophic. It was a relentless, sickening spiral of bets and losses, each one bigger and more reckless than the last. He wasn't just in debt, he was a gambling addict. And that was it, the bottomless pit. He hadn't just been lying to us, he had been lying to himself for years. Our mother's will wasn't a windfall, it wasn't a prize he had won. It was a lifeline he had forged himself, crafted from deceit and built upon the heartbreak of the very person who trusted him most. I took a deep breath, my hands steady now. I spent hours taking high-resolution, perfectly lit photographs of the will and a dozen of my mother-in-law's cards, ensuring every fibre of the paper, every nuance of the ink was captured. I sent these digital files, encrypted, to a forensic handwriting expert I had vetted extensively online. The original documents never left my sight. It was a risk, but a calculated one, one with impeccable credentials and a reputation for discretion. The final piece of my arsenal was on its way. With the forensic report confirming my suspicions, every piece of evidence was now in place. The bankruptcy filing, the mountain of credit card debt, the casino statements, and now the expert's undeniable conclusion that the signature on the will was a forgery. I had the ammunition. I had the motive, the means, and the proof of the crime. But a direct confrontation would be a messy, brutal affair. It would shatter Mark, forcing him to choose between his wife and his brother in the most public, painful way. I couldn't do that to him. He needed to see the truth for himself, not just hear it from me. So I chose a different path, a path paved with sentiment and nostalgia, a weapon Julian himself would never see coming. I approached Mark one evening as he was looking at an old photo of him and Julian as kids, standing with their mother between them in the garden of their childhood home. His face was a mixture of love and sorrow. I didn't mention the fraud. I didn't talk about the lies or the money. Instead, I spoke of memories. "You know," I began, my voice gentle, "I was thinking about the house. It's going to feel so strange not having it in the family." He nodded, his eyes still on the photo. "I know. I was thinking we should have one last family dinner there," I continued, carefully planting the seed. "Everyone together. The whole family. We could cook Mom's favourite recipes, tell stories about her, just one last time, to say goodbye to the house properly, to say goodbye to her." I let my voice fill with emotion, an emotion that was entirely genuine. I did want to honour her memory. I just had a very specific way of doing it. I watched him as he considered it. His grief was still a raw, open wound, but my suggestions seemed to reach through it, touching the part of him that craved closure. He looked up at me, a flicker of warmth returning to his eyes for the first time in weeks. That's a really nice idea, Amelia," he said softly. "Mum would have liked that." The first hook was set. The next day I called Julian. His enthusiasm was immediate and sickeningly cheerful. "Amelia, what a wonderful idea! You're always so thoughtful, sis," he boomed through the phone. "Of course, the house is your house. Let's do it this weekend. I'll even break out that special bottle of wine Mom was saving." "That would be perfect, Julian," I said, my voice sweet as honey. As I hung up the phone, the sweetness in my voice evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Yes, Julian," I thought. "Bring out the best wine. We're going to need something to toast to the truth." I spent the rest of the afternoon sending out invitations to the entire extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, and while they were all RSVPing with happy nostalgia, I was secretly preparing my presentation, loading the bankruptcy files, the debt statements, and the damning handwriting analysis onto a tablet. The stage was being set for one final performance. The house was filled with the warm, comforting aroma of my mother-in-law's signature roast chicken. Laughter echoed through the halls, chasing away the shadows of grief that had lingered for weeks. Julian, playing the role of the gracious host and devoted son to perfection, moved through the crowd with a bottle of expensive red wine, refilling glasses, sharing anecdotes about his mother that made everyone smile and dab at their eyes. He was charming, attentive, and completely in control. He had everyone in the palm of his hand. Mark, seated beside me, even managed a genuine smile, a sight that both warmed and broke my heart. He was so happy to be surrounded by family, so ready to believe in the illusion of unity Julian had so expertly crafted. After the main course plates were cleared, Julian tapped his glass with a fork, calling for everyone's attention. He stood, his expression a perfect blend of sorrow and strength. He delivered a moving speech, a tribute to his mother's memory. He spoke of her kindness, her wisdom, and the profound responsibility he now felt to uphold her legacy and care for the family she had built. He talked about how the house wasn't just bricks and mortar, but a symbol of their enduring love and connection. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. He raised his glass. "To Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "forever in our hearts." The room echoed with the toast, "To Mom." As the emotional tide began to recede, I calmly pushed my chair back and stood up, my tablet in hand. The quiet clink of my water glass was the only sound. Every eye turned to me. "Julian spoke so beautifully about Mom's legacy," I began, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the sentimental haze. "And I agree. I think the greatest legacy she left us was her belief in honesty. She couldn't stand lies. So, in her honour, I'd like to share a few memories of my own, a few truths that I think she would have wanted us all to know." I tapped the screen of my tablet, connecting it to the large television mounted on the living room wall. The family photos that had been scrolling by were replaced by a stark, black and white document, the official court filing for Julian's bankruptcy. A collective gasp went through the room. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the warmth and laughter out of the air. Julian's face, which had been glowing with self-satisfaction, froze. The colour drained from it as if a plug had been pulled. Before he could form a word, before anyone could react, I swiped the screen. The next image appeared, a summary of his credit card debt, a dizzying list of creditors and terrifying numbers highlighted in red. I swiped again and again. Page after page of financial ruin, a secret history of desperation laid bare for everyone to see. I didn't editorialize, I didn't accuse, I simply let the facts speak for themselves. Julian finally found his voice, forcing a short, sharp laugh. The sound was jarring in the dead silence. "This is absurd! Amelia, what is this? Some kind of pathetic fantasy because you didn't get what you wanted." He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, turning his pleading eyes to the rest of the family. "These are just numbers on a screen. Business has its ups and downs, everyone knows that." He then locked his gaze on Mark, his voice filled with feigned hurt. "Mark, brother, look at what she's doing. She's trying to tear our family apart over some financial troubles I was already handling. Are you really going to let her do this?" For a brief, terrible moment, a flicker of doubt crossed the faces in the room. His desperate performance was convincing. I let his words hang in the air, letting the family absorb his frantic denial. Then I met his gaze, my own calm and unyielding. "It's not about your financial troubles, Julian," I said, my voice dropping to an icy calm that cut through his bluster. "It's about this." Then came the final slide, the one I had been waiting for. On the left was a close-up of my mother-in-law's shaky, heartfelt signature from a birthday card. On the right, magnified to an impossible size, was the smooth, confident forgery from the will. Beneath them, the conclusion from the forensic expert's report was displayed in bold, unequivocal letters. "The questioned signature on the last will and testament is conclusively determined to be a forgery." I lowered the tablet and looked directly at Julian. His entire body was rigid, his knuckles white where he gripped the back of his chair. "Mum taught us that a signature is a promise," I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. I pointed to the image of the real signature. This was her promise. Then my gaze hardened as I pointed to the forgery. I'm not sure whose promise this is, but it wasn't hers." The room remained utterly still. All the attention, all the sympathy, all the admiration that had been directed at Julian just moments before now turned into a laser-like focus of shock and dawning horror. His collapse wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a silent implosion happening in slow motion right before our eyes. Mark slowly turned his head to look at his brother. His face was a canvas of pure devastation. There was no anger in his eyes, not yet. Just a deep, bottomless well of pain and betrayal that was far more damning than any shout of rage could ever be. "Why, Julian?" Mark's voice was a shattered whisper. "Why?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. It didn't need an answer. In that moment, Julian had lost everything. Not just the inheritance he had tried to steal, but his honor, his reputation, and the love of the brother who had always looked up to him. Later that night, long after the last shocked relative had departed, Mark and I stood alone in the quiet house. The truth, ugly and painful, had finally been brought into the light. The house was his now, truly his. Our mother-in-law's real legacy, one of honesty and love, had been defended. Justice doesn't always come with the bang of a judge's gavel. Sometimes it arrives in the suffocating silence of a dining room where all the lies have finally run out of breath. What would you have done in Amelia's shoes? Is quiet, calculated revenge the most satisfying kind? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories where justice is served and the truth always comes to light, make sure you subscribe to Whispers of Revenge and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single story. And if you believe Amelia got her perfect revenge, show your support by giving this video a like. Thanks for listening.